trading, knowledge is power, and lack of knowledge in what you're doing can be costly, very costly. So you need a solid foundation of quality market education. Whether you're new to trading or a seasoned veteran looking to add advanced strategies to your arsenal, there's always something to learn and something to improve on. And now you can access the same knowledge that professional traders receive with Market Rebellion's Trading Education. I'm Bill Johnson, Head of Options Education here at Market Rebellion, and we've assembled a comprehensive curriculum based on decades of real trading experience, covering everything you need to know about trading options from beginner to advanced. We go way beyond the nuts and bolts of options theory to teach you how to apply specific trading strategies and the techniques needed to adapt your trades when markets shift. Regardless of your goals, you'll gain access to the education you need with easy-to-consume lessons so you can learn to trade with confidence, enhance your knowledge, and master the practical skills required for market success. So please join us for in-depth trading education only from Market Rebellion. Hey, good afternoon, Market Rebels. There's everybody. I think I saw a lot of you in our Q&A earlier today, and I thought this might be a little help because we did a lunch crunch question in there that might be a little bit more on the difficult side. So hopefully this will give you some hints about how to solve it. But what we're going to talk about today is it's a concept that comes up a lot, especially for people who are doing stock replacement. And you've heard us talk about many times where we'll say, don't worry about the cost of carry, because that's theoretically coming back to you because you're not paying as much to own or to control the stock, and therefore you're keeping more money in your money market. So those tend to offset. Well, maybe they offset. If the market is let's say, using a 5% risk-free rate to price options, and your broker's paying 5%, then it is true that they just offset and you can ignore them. But most of the time, that's not going to be true. You're going to see something like the market rate might be 5% and your broker's paying 1%, in which case now the cost of carry does become a concern. Well, the question is, what interest rate is the market using? And how do you figure that out? So there are a lot of practical uses for this, especially for stock replacement. It's not super easy, but it's also not super difficult. There is a little bit of math, but we're going to take it very slow, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding about how to figure this out. So let's start off with our Chalk Talk question like we always do. Let's say that a stock is 100, one-year $100 call is priced at 1033. The one-year corresponding put is at 557. And the question is, what's the risk-free interest rate? In other words, what's the interest rate that the market must be using to generate these prices? Now, again, the reason this is a good question is that most of the time when you're doing, let's say, a pricing model, you have to put the interest rate in. And then you can always back out of it and we can say, all right, well, here's the cost of carry. It becomes relatively easy because you know the interest rate. But now we have prices, but we don't have an interest rate. And so what we're trying to figure out is there a way that we can back into this and figure out what interest rate the market is using to generate these prices. Now, one thing right off the bat, we can tell that because these numbers are not equal, there must be some interest rate. For at least for a European pricing model, these options would be priced at exactly the same thing. But because they're different, we know that there's some kind of an interest rate, and the question is, what is that? Well, let's go find out. So you've probably guessed by now the topic is, which interest rate is the market using? And we're going to figure out how to do that just by looking at your call and put prices. Now, before we do it, I said there was a little bit of math, a couple of little building blocks we have to cover first. Otherwise, it would just be, I think, very confusing for people. So the two key concepts that we have to cover, one is the time value of money, and the second is synthetic positions. And we're going to put these together, and that's how we're going to come up to the answer. Now, before we do, please remember, marketrebellion.com/get started. all free stuff, lots of great tutorials, videos, articles to help you get a real solid footing with your options trading. Lots of topics like you'll see right here. So let's start with the first one on the list with the time value of money. This simply says that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. In other words, if somebody says, I'll give you a choice, you can either have $1 today or I'll pay it to you 1 year from now. Now, of course, with $1, it's not going to make a big difference, but let's say it's $10,000 or $100,000. That's what it means, is that you'd rather have money in your hands today than in the future, all things being equal. Why? Because you could invest that money. If somebody's willing to give you $10,000 today or in a year, take your choice, well, take it today because you could put it into a risk-free bond or a treasury bill, pull the $10,000 out in 1 year. You've still got your $10,000 in a year, but now you've got the interest. So that's why we'd rather have, again, all things equal, the money in our hands today. Now, when we talk about the time value of money, we're generally using the risk-free rate, again, the treasury bill rate, because that's what's guaranteed. That's what we know for sure that we could get. So, I mean, in some instances, you might want to use different discount rates for different problems in finance. You might say, well, I think the market's going to do 10% this year or 15%, and use that as a discount rate. The problem with that is you don't know that. So for a lot of problems in finance, we're going to use the risk-free rate, and that's what we're going to use here. So let's say that you have $100 right now in your pocket. This is what's called the present value. It's just the value right now at the present. If you invest that money, let's say at 5%, notice that we multiply. Let's say multiply times 1 plus the interest rate, or 1.05. That tells us you would have $105 in 1 year. And that is called the future value. It's the value in the future. Now, like most math problems, we can solve going left to right, but we can also solve going right to left. So maybe we reverse the question a little bit. Maybe somebody owes you 105 in 1 year, and they're saying, well, how much would you accept today to settle the debt? Well, a lot of people say, hey, if you owe me 105 in a year, you owe me $105. Well, that's not really true, because money has different values at different times, as we're seeing here. So what we would do is, notice that we multiplied going left to right. Now we're going to divide. So we're going to take that 105 future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate, or in this example, 1.05, and we get $100. So the answer is you should be willing to accept $100 today to settle the debt, because you could invest it at 5% and still have the 105 in the future. They're just two different ways of looking at the same cash flow. Just you want to look at it today, in today's value, or in the future value. So in the business of finance, we would say that those two are equal. We're not saying that 100 equals 105. We're saying $100 paid today equals 105 paid in a year if interest rates are 5%. All right, so that's what we mean. The main concept we're going to be using is present value. So that's the first concept we got to knock out, our first little building block. The second is synthetic positions, and we've talked about these before. But a synthetic position in the options world is when we have two sets of positions that produce the same risk graph, the same profit and loss diagram. And so we're going to use a little formula here. We're going to take the stock plus the put, that's the value of the put, minus the call, value of the call, and that's going to equal a bond. Now, when I say the call and the put prices, they have to have the same strike. They do not have to be at the money, but the call and put have to have the same strike. And when we do this, when we combine these three, stock, put, and call, they're going to behave like a T-bill. So for instance, if we have a short $100 call and the stock is 100 and we have a long $100 put, let's say we have all three of these positions in our account. How do we know that that's going to be guaranteed to be worth 100, let's say in a year or at expiration, whenever that happens to be? Well, let's knock them out in order. Let's say if the stock is less than 100, exactly equal to 100, or greater than 100. Those are the only three states the stock could be in at expiration. So let's do the first one and make this the easiest, where it's at the money. the stock expires exactly at 100 in, let's say, in 1 year. Well, in that case, the call and the put will expire worthless, right? They're not in the money, they're at the money, which is just as good as out of the money at expiration. So if we had this position, we could then sell the stock and we would have $100. That position would be worth 100. What if the stock is below 100? It's below our strike. Well, now the call's going to go out worthless, but that means that our put is in the money. That's why these strikes have to be the same. Our put is now in the money, so we could exercise our put, collect the strike, and we will again collect $100. All right, so now 2 out of 3, we're going to be sitting on $100 for sure. What if the stock is above 100? Well, in that case, the put expires worthless, but we have a short call. And we're going to get assigned, right? The person who bought that call is going to exercise it, or somebody will, and we will collect the $100 strike. So once again, we get $100. So look at that, 3 for 3. No matter what happens to the stock's price, we are guaranteed to be worth $100, or the exercise price at expiration. That's why this position, these 3 pieces, behave like a bond. So think about it. If you have a $100 T-bill or a $1,000 T-bill, it's guaranteed to grow to that face value. And therefore, you will pay a little bit less than that, the present value, and you will collect the face value at maturity. All right, so that's why these synthetic positions work. Now, they're called synthetics because just like synthetic oil or synthetic wool, they look, act, feel, behave just like the real thing, but they're made from different components. And that's what we're doing here. I can create stock with using calls and puts. I can create a put by using stock and calls. All right, so that's why they're called synthetic positions. So it turns out that 2 sets of positions that produce the same risk graph are considered synthetic equivalents. So again, we're going to use the stock plus the put plus a short call. That's why it's a minus sign right there. But now instead of a bond, we're just going to say it's the exercise price. Because as we saw in that example, that's what it's going to be guaranteed to be worth, is that strike price. So we can shorten it up. We can say S plus P minus C equals the present value of our exercise price or of the bond. And so the thing to take from this is that any one of these can be made up with the remaining 2. And that's how it's going to help us to figure out the interest rate. Now, before we go any further, again, one last quick plug, marketrebellion.com/get started for lots of great materials just like this, videos, articles to help you get started. So let's do an example. I know it can seem a little confusing. Trust me, it's not as bad as it sounds. Let's say our stock is at 100 and we're looking at the 100 call and the 100 put. We have 360 days to expiration. I'm just doing that to make the interest rate calculations easy. And let's say that our risk-free interest rate is 5%. Well, what we can do is we can say, what's the present value of the exercise price or the bond? So we can figure this out. We know that stock plus put minus call equals the present value of the exercise price. So if the risk-free rate is 5%, how do we figure out the present value? Well, remember, we take the $100 strike price or the $100 cash flow divided by 1 plus the interest rate equals 95.24. So if somebody owes you $100 in a year, you should be willing to take 95.24 today to settle the debt. Or you could say, if I have 95.24 today in my pocket, I can invest it at 5%, which will grow to $5 in 1 year. Right? That's the present value of $5. So if we have a 5% interest rate and a $100 stock price or an exercise price, yes, $5 or 5% of 100 is $5. But remember, you're not going to get that for 1 year. So we can't say that the present value is 5. That's the future value. So it's a subtle distinction, but it's going to be very important. The present value of that, of the $100 is going to be 95.24. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples here. let's do stock plus put minus the call equals the present value of the exercise price. What we're going to do is we're going to flip this around. And we're going to say the stock minus the present value of the exercise price. We're just taking present value of the exercise price over to the left. And then we're taking call minus put on the right. So what we're saying is the difference between the call and put prices has to be equal to the stock, the difference of the stock and the present value of the exercise. So in this example, $100 stock price, the present value of that was 95.24, right? That's just 100 divided by 1.05, has to equal the difference between the call and the put. So one thing we can do is we can say, all right, if we don't know the present, what the interest rate is, we don't know the present value, what we can see is we can say, all right, 476, and I guess I probably should have said at this point, is equal to the difference of the call and the put. But you're going to find out in the market it's not going to equal because we're not taking the present value of it. There's going to be a discrepancy, and that discrepancy is going to be the interest, right? So it's really just that easy. So for example, now that we've gotten those building blocks out of the way, here's a pricing model. We've got the stock at 100, strike at 100, 360 days to expiration, 1 year. Volatility is 20% and the interest rate is 5%. Now, it doesn't matter. We could do different stock prices. We'll do one in a minute. We could do different days to expiration, different volatilities. It all comes out in the wash into these prices. That's part of the beauty of this equation. But notice how we had to input 5%. All right, so take a look. What's the difference between the call and the put? 1033 minus 557. That's 476. Where's that coming from? Well, the difference between the call and the put should equal, or we're going to set it equal to stock minus the exercise price. Now, notice we're not taking the present value. That's what's going to cause the discrepancy. Why aren't we taking the present value? Because we don't know the interest rate. Right now, in this example, we do, but we're pretending that we don't, that we just see these option prices in the market. So the call and the put, the difference is what, 476? What's the difference between the stock and the exercise price? Well, that's 100 minus 100, which is 0. So we come up with 476 is not equal to 0. That's what I said in the previous slide. We're going to get a discrepancy because we're not able to take the present value. We just take the difference between the call and the put, compare it to the difference between the stock and the exercise price. And that's 476. And where's that 476 coming from? That's the present value of $5. If we deposit $100 into a bank paying 5%, we're going to get $5 in 1 year. But today's value is $5 divided by 1.05, or 476. And that's what's causing this discrepancy between the call and the put prices. Let's try a different one. Let's put the stock at 105. Remember, I said that the call and put have to be the same strike, and they are. We're using right here 100 for the strike. But it doesn't have to be an at-the-money strike. The stock could be less than, equal to, greater than, doesn't matter. It all comes out in the math. So what happens now? Now we can see the price for our call got hiked up to $13.73. Put is down to $3.97. What's the difference now? $9.76. All right, go back to our formula. The difference between the call and the put, we're going to set equal to the stock minus the exercise price. Now remember, they would be equal if we knew the present value of the exercise price. But we're pretending that we can't see this over here. We're just seeing the call and put prices. So now the difference between the call and the put, $9.76. The difference between the stock and the exercise price, we have a 105 stock price minus 100, 105 minus 100, and we get 976 is not equal to 5. Why is there a discrepancy? Because of the cost of carry. How big is this discrepancy? 476. It's exactly what we saw when we used a $100 stock price. So it's always going to create a 476 discrepancy. Okay, so now let's do it with the interest rates unknown. So we're going to look at this and we'll say the difference over here is what? there's our formula. Call minus put equals stock minus exercise price. We said 476, setting it equal to, in this case, 0. And we found that 476 is not equal to 0. Well, all we have to do is say, how big is 476 on a $100 strike price? Right there. It's about 4.76%. Now, you're probably thinking, hey, wait a minute, that's not exactly right because we used 5%. And that's because, and I'll show you how you can correct for that. But for right now, for practical purposes, that's probably good enough. So if you're seeing that the market, in this case, let's say, is using 4.76% interest and your broker's paying 2%, well, you might want to account for that cost of carry. You might want to push those deltas a little deeper in the money. But if you're getting the same rate, it's a wash. We can then just look at the corresponding put to see the volatility value. And that's going to help us figure out which strike we want to use, let's say, for stock replacement. Now, again, there's a lot of different applications why we might want to know this. If you're doing box spreads, conversions, reversals, lots of reasons we would want to be able to price or find out what the interest rate is that the market is using. So again, this is just what we might call a rough rule of thumb. We could come up with 476. What if we went back to this one where the stock was 105? Now remember, we're not seeing this on the left. We have to pretend that we're just looking at our broker's platform. We see these two option prices. Call minus put equals S minus E. This is what you have to learn. We know that 976 we are going to set equal to stock minus the exercise price is 105 minus 100. So we have 976 is not equal to 5. There's a discrepancy. Why is there a discrepancy? Because we're not able to account for the cost of carry. Because we don't know it. We don't know the interest rate. If we could take the present value of the exercise price, these numbers would exactly balance. But we're just kind of doing a little backdoor shortcut. We're saying, all right, look, we don't know the present value because we don't know the interest rate. Let's figure out what the discrepancy is. So the discrepancy, again, is 476. See, that doesn't go away because that's the present value of the $5 interest rate. So we're going to say 476 divided by the $100 strike would be roughly a 4.76% interest rate. So it's really just that simple. Now, I know some people are saying, yeah, well, you're coming up with 476, but the truth is it's 5. Yeah, that's true. We can get a little fancier if you want to use a little bit of math. And depending on your pricing model, some are going to use what's called continuous compounding with a little letter E, exponential function. It can get a little complicated. But for those who are okay with the math, here's a fairly simple way to do it. Here's our rate, let's say 0.05, divided by 1.05. We're trying to find the present value of that would be 0.0476. So we just start that. We set up the problem that way. We bring this over to the other side. We know that the rate that we're trying to solve for equals 0.0476 times 1 plus R. All right, so now what we have to do, we take 0.0476 times 1, and then we have to also multiply it by R. So we have to do plus 0.0476R. We take the R minus the 0.0476. We're just taking this over to the left, equals 0.0476. We get 0.9524 on this R equals 0.0476. We divide by 0.9524 and look at that. We come up with exactly 5%. Now, again, that's probably a lot of work, or unless you have it set up in an Excel spreadsheet or something, and it's probably not going to alter your decision. So for the most part, I just do exactly what we looked at. What's the difference between the call and the put? What's the difference between the stock and the exercise price? What's the discrepancy? Divide it by your strike, and there's the interest rate that the market is using, more or less. Okay? So again, that might not be real clear why you would need to know this, but just trust me, it does for a lot of strategies in trying to figure out even fair values, conversions, reversals, pricing an option. We need to know what interest rate the market is using. And so sometimes people say, well, if it's a 30-day option, look at the 30-day T-bill rate. Well, that's a pretty good guess, but is that what the market's using? See, we don't really know. It's really driven by supply and demand. So again, that's kind of working it backwards. We could say it's a good estimate, but it's not necessarily what the market is using. And that becomes a little more difficult thing to figure out, as you found out. But again, keep it simple. All right. Difference between the call and the put, compare it to the stock minus the exercise price, and whatever that discrepancy is, divide it by your strike, and that's your interest rate. Okay, so let's go back to our question. We had the stock at 100, 1 year $100 call was 1033, the $100 put was 557. What's the interest rate? Well, this was an at the money, so we divide or subtract them out. We know that it's what? 476. What's the difference between the stock and the exercise price? 0. 476 is not equal to 0. Where's that 476 discrepancy coming from? From the interest rate. So I could take 4.76 divided by 100 and say it's roughly a 4.76% interest rate. And if you want to go that extra little step, we could back into it and figure out that the market is using 5%. So there's always a way to do it. Again, it's not super important that you understand the math behind it, but I think it's important to understand to look at the difference between the call and the put and the difference between the stock and the exercise price. And if we know the present value of that, those will be exactly equal. But because we don't know it, we can use this little backdoor method and figure out very quickly what rate the market is using. So I hope that helps. And I know for all the people in our Q&A, our lunch bunch there, will certainly recognize this. We did a variation on it. I only made it for 6 months, so you'll have to do a little correction factor there. But these are some of the many things that we talk about in our Q&A classes, things that will help you make better decisions and understand the more serious and the more profitable types of strategies with options, as opposed to saying, I just have a hunch that the stock's going up or down, let me buy calls or puts. That's wishful thinking. That's a big hope. You need to understand these details. And if you don't understand it, you might want to give us a call at Market Rebellion. Check us out on the web. You can get hooked up with somebody like Stu or Scotty and get some coaching lessons. You can also join us right here every Thursday, 4 p.m. for more Coach's Corner. So I hope that helped, and we'll see you next week.